Welcome to this episode of Talk is Biotech. My name is Guru Singh. I'm a founder and CEO of SciSpot.io. SciSpot is a digital operating platform for biotech companies. And today I'm with Mike Tarselli. He's a CSO of TetraScience, R&D Data Cloud company. So he is passionate about digitization and harmonization of data at biotech and pharma company. He is a true thought leader in the biotech space, or I should say cloud biotech space. So, in this interview, we will learn from Mike about the company he works for, which is Tetra Science. We will learn from him about his background, his mission, vision, and many other cool things, cool stories. So, let's listen to the interview. Welcome to the show, Mike. Great to have you.
Thank you very much, Guru. Thank you for the invitation.
Do you want to start with a quick introduction? Tell about you.
Sure, I'd love to. My name's Mike Tarselli. I'm the CSO, Chief Scientific Officer for TetraScience, a cloud data science startup based in Boston, Massachusetts. My background is I have a PhD in chemistry from UNC Chapel Hill, a postdoc from Scripps Research, and I've spent lots of years juggling between roles at CROs, roles in Big Pharma, roles in scientific societies, and all over the map. And now I'm with a tech science startup.
Very cool. Do you want to talk about your story, your journey? How did you end up here, basically?
As a small child, I was informed by my family that since they were all nurses, many of my female relatives are nurses, that it would be great if we had a doctor in the family. So they showed me, how to take pulses and how to take temperatures and, administer drugs. And they said, be a doctor, be a doctor. They bought me, sweaters from Harvard and UMass and MIT and said, this would be really fun if you did this. And so I kept thinking, okay, doctor, medical doctor, this is going to work. And I got into college and trained as an emergency medical technician so I could help people out. And then I realized I did not care for blood. I kind of passed out sometimes when I saw it. And it was not perhaps the best idea for a doctor to have that particular feature.
Right.
And so, I asked my academic faculty, I said, well, what's kind of like being a medical doctor where you can still help people, but you don't have to cut patients open and treat wounds? And they said, have you ever thought about medicinal chemistry? And I said, what's that? Like, it's not my family's background. I've never heard of it. So tell me more. So they said, well, drug companies need people to make drugs. And I said, okay. And what degree do you need for that? And they said, a PhD in chemistry. I said, oh, well, I'll go try something first and then I'll see. So I joined a pharma in Boston, Ariad Pharmaceuticals, doesn't exist anymore. And I did a couple summer internships there and then switched to Millennium, also doesn't exist. Both have since been subsumed into Takeda Pharmaceuticals. But they told me that I learned, really got me to love medicinal chemistry, should I say. And I was so excited about it and knew so much about it that I joined right after undergrad. And then they said, well, if you want to really learn about projects, and you want to have an outsized impact on our teams, you're going to have to go get that PhD. So I said, how long does that take? And they said, 5, 6 years. I said, I'll be out in 4. I was out in 4 years, called them back, said, hey, can I have my old job back? And they said, we really prefer when candidates have postdocs. And I said, what's a postdoc? So I of course, went back and did a postdoc at Scripps, and I was out of that fairly fast and called them back. And they said, well, it's the Great Recession. All of our positions are frozen. Sorry. And I said, okay, what now? So I got a job with a contract research organization in the mountains of North Carolina, worked on customer quoting, worked on inventory, supply chain, right? Learning the business side of science. And then moved to a startup in New Haven, Connecticut, affiliated with Yale. Learned there more about business development, local community outreach, how to start a lab from scratch and, drive trucks full of used lab equipment over to a facility. And while I was there, I was doing some science writing, sort of moonlighting at nights and weekends, writing blog posts and such. And I was found doing that by a person online who said, I need a role at Novartis where somebody can be partially science, partially business, and partially tech. Can you do it? And I said, well, I can try anything. So joined Novartis, grew a team from 2 to about 15, 16 over about a 5-year period. And then I transitioned to SLAS, which is a scientific society, where I was the
Right.
scientific director. Yeah. And then now I'm here. So it's been a very windy, wobbly path that I did not expect. And I'm very, very happy to be with TetraScience now.
It sounds like you gathered different experiences to be ready for this role, to be more than ready for this role.
Which is funny because if you had asked me, 20 years ago, I would never have pictured myself here, right? Because
Right.
the linear path I had expected was, oh, I'll be a med chemist, then I'll lead a team of med chemists, then someday maybe I'll be a director. So this is a very
Right.
different path, but one I'm very happy to be on.
Right. So what brought you here? Like, what was your motivation? Why did you join TetraScience?
Right, two things really. First, I'd noticed a lot in the industry about this move towards automation and towards data integration on the cloud. During my tenure at SLAS, it was very clear to me that everyone was trying to move towards integration. And many senior advisors, sort of at the board level and in the community, were saying, oh man, we got to fix our data problems. And I said, kept my ear out and said, oh, that's interesting, because I kept hearing it over and over from many major vendors and many major pharmaceutical companies. So this role was already sort of primed in my head, and I had been listening actually to the TetraScience podcast, which was
Mm-hmm.
released, I think, up to 2019, about what they were doing in this space. Consequently, also, my former CIO at Novartis, who had since moved to Flagship Pioneering, sort of tapped me on the shoulder and said, hey, there's this rollover here that sounds like you, but let's see. And over the course of 4 or 5 months of us dialoguing back and forth with the company founders, it made it fairly clear that it was a good fit. So two things, a personal entreaty and also a, professional lean towards what I saw coming.
Very cool. So do you want to talk about TetraScience? What is it? If
Sure.
someone never heard of it.
TetraScience, being honest, we call ourselves digital plumbers. We build pipes in the sky for pharma companies. That's a cute and fanciful way to say that we do data integration into the cloud,
Mm-hmm.
right? For instruments, for software, for data science connectors. So let's say you're a large pharma and you've inherited a 50 or sometimes 100-year surfeit of data, and you need to figure out a way to get that all usable, interpretable, understandable by your whole staff. How do you do that? It's probably segmented, right? It's probably the biochem department has one silo, the chemistry
Right.
department another, manufacturing a third, and on, right? It's also probably not interpretable. Some will be stored in ancient database formats. Some will be, on the cloud. Some will be in thumb drives or on local storage. So how do you get that all in one place so you can start aggregating it and making decisions? Well, it's tough to do, but one way to do it is to say, from this point on, we are going to start moving everything to one data lake, right? And we can help you with that data lake. And we can also help you connect up all those instruments that are producing that data, get it into the lake. And then we can help you harmonize it to a standardized, open, readable format, not our proprietary format, just a JSON file. And then we can help you push it to where it needs to go, like a pipe would do for water. You don't necessarily notice the pipes under your house or under your street. You turn on a spigot and water comes out. Same
Right.
thing for us. We hope that you can just open up in a biotech or a pharma your electronic lab notebook or your visualization and just see data come out.
Right. So
Right.
what is your product? Is it the off-the-shelf product, or it is all custom consulting? You map the workflows, you create the data lake specific to the customer.
Right. We do have two lines of business. One is called Tetra Lab Monitoring, where we have IoT sensors that relay more continuous data, temperature data, pressure data, gas monitoring software. And then the other is called Tetra Data Platform, which is the data lake. And in this context, we have this out-of-the-box product where if you come on with us, you get all the integrations that we've ever done. Think of it like Netflix or like any
Mm-hmm.
subscription service. When you subscribe to Netflix, you don't say, I want these 100 movies. They give you everything that they have. Same
Right.
thing for us. If you subscribe with us, we give you all the connectors and all the data science apps we've ever built, and you can use them. Should you wish to build something different, you can talk to us about custom consulting, but generally we say, here's the model, here's all the integrations, go.
Very cool. Do you want to give one case study, like without naming your customer, obviously? Like what type of data you have to combine and make it more fair, like accessible, structure it so it is machine readable, and all the fancy things you have to do once your data is gathered or centralized.
Sounds wonderful. Let's use a case study of a large pharma that we've helped recently with their mass spec and HPLC data. They said, we have a fleet of about 1,000 instruments. They're scattered all over multiple sites, multiple operators, multiple dependencies. Some are in research, some are in development, a couple are in manufacturing. They are luckily behind this one master software instance, so that helps us. But the rest of them are loosely connected, and some maybe aren't even on the network. So what can you guys do? So we went in and did some analysis work with them. We mocked up all the connectors they needed. We drummed up this thing that is based on waters and power, and that takes in the data, harmonizes it to this specific JSON hierarchical format, and then pushes it to, in this case, their ELN and their visualization software. So we went from a situation where 1,000 different instruments were being maintained by 1,000 different operators and perhaps processing differently, printing out on paper, et cetera, to them literally saving, I think it was 8 hours per lab per week in processing time, right? Which becomes real time when you multiply it by 1,000. Right. And they can now basically open up their ELNs or Viz tools and see all this harmonized mass spec and HPLC data spilling forth. They're also working with us to build custom apps on the backside that let them see things like uptime of HPLCs or predictive maintenance for columns. Turns out if you have all of the data from all the instruments, you can start to graph where peaks fall on chromatograms. And if you see one, for example, slipping, you can say, aha, something's wrong with that column in a way you couldn't do before.
So what's proprietary here? So this data lake is owned by pharma, but you obviously help them structure it, making it more accessible, like verify data. That's what they call it, right? Verify.
Verify is a word people use, yes.
To verify data, make it more machine readable, accessible, reusable. So,
sure.
So what's proprietary here? Do you have any machine learning models in the back?
We have two sides that are proprietary. If you think of the pipe in the middle as being our architecture, but we're saving things to JSON. This is open and transparent to tell you. Then the logic and the proprietariness come on the front side. The connectors we build to the instruments. So this is the how do you unplumb certain files or certain APIs and then make them harmonized. That part takes some knowledge and skill from our engineers and our architects. So that's our proprietary bit up front. And then out the back, we do construct these apps and these what we call pipelines to process the data. Most are open and come with our subscription. A couple are company proprietary because we do something specific with them.
Very cool.
The rest of it's pretty open.
Yeah. So what's the end goal here? So like what is the mission and vision of the company? So you digitize their processes. And what's next? Like what's the real goal here?
Sure. The real goal is scientists, when they are trained in graduate school, I know I'm one, you're one as well, are not trained to process data. You really should not be a data processing engine in your head. Something else should do that. That should be automated the way it is in retail, in finance, in automation, for automotive industries, for example. And you should concentrate on doing, making the new molecule, devising the new assay, drumming up the new animal model. Yes, you will need to analyze and interpret data, make decisions upon it, but the moving this into a spreadsheet, grabbing the rows, moving that to Viz, generating slides, why? So many hours a week, Guru, so many hours. And it's such a problem for the entire industry. We've seen calculations by Gartner, by Accenture, Deloitte, et cetera, that have made calculations something along the lines of scientists spending somewhere between 40% and 60% of their operable time processing, being human data processors.
Right.
That's crazy. That means you're not getting their time on the science or on the new experiments. So if we could take that away, our theory is that biotech and pharma would move 2 to 3 times faster, and that they'd be able to do things with their data that they'd never been able to before, such as use it for consistent machine learning. If it's all curated and harmonized, well, you don't have to pay someone to do that part either, and it makes your models much more reliable. And then all the way downstream, we just actually published a white paper about what we call bidirectional data flow. Cyclofluidic has done this. This is a company from about 5 or 10 years ago. MIT has done this. What about if data goes over to a data target, somebody takes a decision, and then that comes back around and controls a robot and does the cascade again and again with new information? If you had that self-reinforcing loop, then you could have automated processes running and doing science for you while you sleep. That would be an amazing time savings and efficiency boost for all of pharma. So that's kind of a taste of where we're going.
So automation is the goal.
Automation is the goal.
All the,
not to put scientists out of business, but to make them better at what they do. Have you ever seen those old-timey movies from the 40s and 50s where somebody makes a phone call and you see the switchboard operators quickly poking in all the connections and making the cables go? I think of that. And I think that that's what a lot of people are doing in their pharma jobs today. They're moving switchboard connections when they could do like phones do today, where they push a button and by magic something comes along and you make a phone call, right? That's because it's highly automated and there's processes to do it. Wouldn't that be great if that's the same to set up your high throughput experimentation or to set up your new assay cascade? Why not push a button and have a machine, run that process faster than you could?
Yeah, what I realized is once we have all the data captured in a well-structured, clean, properly labeled, we will probably end up reducing number of wet lab experiments we have to perform. It's currently all the historical data. It's hard even to reuse it, right? So once you keep the data hygiene in place, you will end up doing less number of experiments. So yeah, I mean, eventually, I'm not saying in a decade, but eventually we will have enough data so we don't have to create a new mouse model, recapitulate Alzheimer's disease, and like again and again. If you see 10 companies working on one drug molecule, like one therapeutic area, one target disease, they're probably doing quite a bit of work exactly the same. So why don't we just generate high quality data once and then make it accessible to all the players in the pre-competitive collaboration stage? But I think number one step is clean data.
Clean the data.
Reusable data. Yeah.
And you're so right. There's so many knock-on effects once you have clean, detailed data. You can almost, like squeezing an orange, you can squeeze more out of that experiment, right? You can get more, if you were capturing all the metadata, the time, the temperature, the operator, the column conditions, everything, and you had it all in a nice model, you could start learning things that would stop you from having to repeat. Right? Maybe you don't realize it, but the flow rate of some assay is what's causing the malfunction, or maybe you don't realize it, but it's some fluorescence setting or some operator error. You would know that if you had all the data in a cleaned, harmonized way.
So what do you think is the, like they call it lab of the future, but let's say, what do you think about pharma of the future or biotech of the future is?
Sure. So I'll take my TetraScience hat off for a minute, and I'll just use my Mike cap, and I'll say that lab of the future is somewhat of an overused term, being honest. Lots of people use it sort of to put up on fronts of conferences, for example, and a lot of it is, well, we updated the thing we told you about 2 years ago by 10%. I want to go much more aggressively and dramatically beyond that, if possible. Why don't we? When we walk into a lab right now, we should not theoretically recognize this lab from 10 years ago if we're really getting to the lab of the future, right? Where are the sensors that are on a scientist to monitor performance and toxicity environment, and temperature or even, performance against the task? Where is the video monitoring of reactions or the holographic modeling for what you're doing, to show you the right way? Where are the very, very dramatically scaled down reactions, assays, cell lines, et cetera, so that instead of doing things in 96 well plates or large round bottom flasks, why are things all not done at the micro or nano scale, right? Echo dispensers exist, 6144 plates exist, organoids exist. How have they not already taken traction? And some company started up where they completely exclude the old way. And they say, we're only doing this new, very, very small screening way. I don't know why that doesn't yet exist. I think it's sort of moving and shuffling, and certain people have certain pieces of it. But I mean, I can go much further, right? Voice control for all lab apparatus, understanding despite regional dialect or accent or whatnot, scientific information commented to a computer out loud, immediate transcribing of reaction data continuously to perhaps a cloud, pre-processing of a machine learning model so that you can actually say, well, instead of just trying everything, let's try the things that the machine has tried to narrow us down to. There's so much that could be done. Virtual lab twins for animals. I know Pistoia and Allotrope are getting at that, these digital twin concepts. And again, standardization across the industry. I know that lots of industries, industrial automation has been standardized for 20, 25 years. How pharma and biotech has not yet gotten there in certain ways is beyond me. They have some, right? There are some standardized grips and standardized bases for plates, some standardized stopper sizes for tops of flasks and tops of tubes, standardized connectors for robots. But generally, standardized ways to consume data or build models, they're not really there.
When I talk to scientists, I ask these same questions, or even R&D, IT, lab informatics people, and they say technology is not ready. That's their point. For example, AR headset or even VR. So let's talk about AR for a second. They seem to feed data to train models. I mean, even like voice assistant, you have to train it. AR is one step ahead because there is a visual element as well. So many of the scientists or early adopters claim it is not usable. So like, what would you say about that? So they say there is barrier and the technology is not ready. It's still, it will take 5 years to reach that maturity. So it is usable by the mass.
So to that, I'd say that certain AR technologies in the consumer sector are well ahead, right? AR is used to train airplane pilots. It's used to train Army, Rangers. It's used to train, your kid to play Pokemon on the street. If that's the case, why can those current analogs, Google Glass being one, it's been around for 12 years now, and then HoloLens and others past that. Those, I believe, have been deployed in limited lab settings, but there, I'm not so sure if it's the technology that's not up. I think it's actually also the operator. It is very difficult to move in today's lab, and I mean that by, what you see with a fume hood or a laminar flow cabinet and, walking around machines. It's hard to do that wearing a giant headset that obscures your vision, or that is hard to move past a hood with because you might knock it off or break it, and that maybe isn't solvent resistant. So I would say a lot of it is the, how shall I say, the UI UX of that last mile, that how do you get somebody to wear these sensors productively, more than it's about the tech not being ready. The tech is probably ready. The humans interacting with it doing science is not.
Very good point. So somebody said that, so you create a machine, you create human. Now, if you really want to integrate these two folks, then you only have two options. One is you make humans become a machine. That's what we tried. That's why there's no real adoption in the industry. We have been trying to
make cyborgs, right?
Implement, We've been trying to use ELNs for last 25 years, 20 years. But still adoption is poor. People are still using paper notebook.
Indeed.
Because our approach was different. We were trying to make humans like machine. Another option is make machines more humanized, so they can come closer to human and the interaction is smooth. So I think that's what we are going after currently, but I couldn't agree more. So currently all the technologies, if you see human machine interface, I think it can take some improvements.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. I would say one thing that I think a lot of people get to with resistance of technology is, it's going to sound weird, but it doesn't look cuddly, right? It doesn't look like a cat or a dog or a helpful thing. It looks like a, big beige or black box sitting over there that makes funny whirring noises that you have to learn languages to interface with, that you have to push buttons in certain sequences or it blows up. I mean, that's nuts. I think that Steve Jobs and Apple were very far ahead on this when they made technology that was very easy to handle, simple to interpret, smooth, easy lines. I wish that sort of same design and interaction ethos were applied to lab machines.
Right. No, machines, even if you use the term bot, people get scared, right? People think,
Yes.
oh, my job will be automated. I will lose my job, or it's still very alien.
Or
So
worse, a security threat, right? Security bot. Bot
yeah,
always sounds like it's going to get and steal your data.
you're right. Another piece is it's more like marketing change management piece, right? Like you have to humanize it to make more acceptable, but still there is to try anything new, you like change management is required. People are not gonna accept something different or something new. It takes time. I mean, there
Yeah.
are early adopters, people who get excited, but I think 80-90% people wait. They wait for social proof. They take time to be comfortable. The change management piece, I think that is the most important thing. You can create all these fancy technologies, all these AI powered platforms, but if you don't do a good job with change management, getting these buy-in from people, I mean, you will not see the power of that platform.
So I'd love to give you two rejoinders about that. First, totally agree with you. In fact, literally right here next to me, I won't show you because the camera won't hold up well, but I literally have the book Crossing the Chasm, which I'm sure you've read, about that early
I
adopters
heard
versus
about it. Yeah.
the general public. I strongly recommend it to anybody listening to this or to you to read it. It does give a lot of interesting insight into why there's 20% of people who say, hooray, robots, they're going to be the future. And the other 80% that says, oh, not for me, not yet. And how long it will take to get across to those people. And then to the point about change management, you're right. We need to show what that beautiful future is going to be. I don't think that there's been a lot of good effort. A lot of times adoption is, well, we heard our competitors are doing this, or we read this in a journal, or we saw this at a trade show. It looks like the best thing. Let's buy one and try it. That's not the same as saying the goal we want to get to is to shrink all of our reactions down or to eliminate mouse models.
Right.
How do we get to that? And then managing people through that curve.
Right. I see all these big pharma companies are doing it just as their innovation project because their competitors are testing AR. They want to test AR too. So it just takes 5 years, 10 years. They create internal reports. And then, I mean, they try to increase adoption. But like you said, you really have to define what is your objective here. Like, what is the promised land you want to reach? Once you know you want to reduce, it's more measurable. Once you know you want to reduce, let's say, in vivo studies by 50%, then you can be more creative. So it shouldn't be focused on technology. It should be focused on like what is your goal. If you define that, then maybe you need mix of technology. With AR, you need voice assistant, and then you need some AI element so that can analyze data and provide recommendation in real time.
Right.
Yeah,
You got to
but
work backwards from the solution.
right. If you just focus on technology, I think it's like adoption will take like 20 years.
Every large tech company you've ever walked into, and I'm sure you've been at several, has a closet in the back that they don't talk about. And that closet, when you open it, has all of the old machines they've tried since 1995. And there's, old giant zip drives in there, and there's ancient versions of old auto injectors and HPLCs, and maybe an old fluorimeter or something. And they can't throw them away because they remember, using them and buying them once. And they don't know what to do with them. It's sort of this weird ancient museum of technology. And that's what you get when you do this piecemeal innovation, as opposed to doing a wholesale change.
You're right. So one thing you mentioned was humanizing technology. Other challenge that you emphasized on was standardization. So I know there are some groups like Pistoia, Alliance, Allotrope, they are focusing on that heavily. So what are the key challenges here? Like, is it because we are generating data in different format? Is it because we don't have clearly defined guidelines? Like, what are the key challenges here and how important it is?
So there's an old quote by George Box that I took off of somebody's blog that I read very extensively that said, all models are wrong, but some are useful. So all standards are wrong in their own little way, but most are very useful, right? If you subscribe to them. So there are standards that are very good at verifying data, to your point. but that maybe won't relay it fast enough for your needs. And there are standards that will give you everything to the most particulate granular detail you could possibly want and line it all out for you. But maybe it's overkill and it kills your storage, or it's not cloud ready. And there are furthermore standards that, a small vocal group says, well, we should all do it this way. And they go very far ahead without hearing from the industry. They code something, they put it out there, and then the industry moves a different way. Or a large event like a recession or the current pandemic comes in and it changes everyone's tack. Had you known in 2019 that a large pandemic was coming, you surely would have made, differences in the vaccine development timeline and the glass availability, right? But in standardization in our world, in pharma, I would say that we still don't have a lot of it. I think a lot of people in chemistry have adopted that, there's conventions to draw molecules. We know when to leave the electrons and the atoms out. We understand some about certain modeling packages, when to trust energies. Okay, those are kind of standards. In the biology world, again, this 96 well plate, the standard SBS format works great for people. Certain mouse models and rat models work great. Certain models for surgery also work fine. But for data standards, I would challenge anyone listening to this to tell me of a usable, interoperable data standard that we've used in biopharma for, say, more than 5 years that is still cohesive, coherent, and interpretable now and used by more than 80% of pharma. Send might come close, the way you exchange biomedical information. Sila has tried doing certain things. Pistoia has set up the Helm package for biomolecules through Pfizer and other folks' effort. And these are gaining traction, but they're not standards to the point where, let me go back and define it a different way. I think that if you have a standard that is significantly clear and useful for the industry, that seniors in college will be using it, right? If it's that clear, then you would teach it at that level. Do you remember taking any classes on standardization as a graduate student or a college student? Because I don't.
Not really, yeah.
So clearly, I don't think if they've not made it backwards in the textbooks, then they're not really standards yet.
But who will create these standards? So do you think this can be enforced by FDA? The way you capture data should be structured in a specific way?
We have seen evidence, and I'll speak for TetraScience again. We've seen evidence of lots of starts and sort of pauses on that frontier by pre-competitive groups, by industry cohorts, and by sort of general standardization bodies like ISO. None of them have stuck for, and I'll go back even further, I'd say for 30 or 40 years, none have stuck generally for data. Because of that, we don't adopt a standard in our platform, right? We again go to JSON. It is a JSON file format, open technology, usable on the web. Technically anybody could write their own. And we just call it a data schema. Folks ask, do we standardize? We say, no. We harmonize. It's into a format. You can do with it as you wish. And should you wish to adopt the allotrope data format or Sila 2.0 or something, we will write you a pipeline that gets it there. But this harmonization layer is specifically to go around the fact that there is no adopted standard.
Very cool. Harmonize versus standardize, because there is no clear standards in place.
Right. To give a personal story, I was just out shopping at a hardware store. We're fixing up our house. I was out shopping at a hardware store, and I realized, looking at all the drill bits, that there's 9/16 and 19/32 and some in metric and some not in metric and some with different types of helices on them and different cutting bits. And I thought to myself, even in a technology that's 300-400 years old, like drilling, there's still really not well adopted standards across the industry. So how would you expect that for an industry as diverse as biotechnology, where you have to develop cells and reagents and probes and chemical matter? If you can't get drill bit standard, how are you going to get this standard?
Right. All these companies have, for one thing, they have 10 different subscriptions, right? So like for ELNs, different departments are using different ELNs.
Different instantiations, different platforms. Some are on premises, some are on the cloud, some are a model between. Oh man, it's all over.
So yeah, I mean, I don't know what's the answer is to, once you set it up, then you work on the interoperability, or you rather get rid of all the legacy stuff and start from scratch. That's why I think smaller companies have competitive edge here, because they don't have any historical baggage. You can fix them right away.
So we co-hosted a webinar 2 or 3 months ago with a partner we call High Res Biosciences. They invited 2 guests, one from Beam Therapeutics in Boston and one from Recursion in Salt Lake City. Both of these companies are younger than 10 years old. Both started with a cloud-first mentality, and both are just rocketing forward. One's based on gene editing technology, and one's based on machine learning applied to image data sets. So they don't have the legacy baggage. They don't have the ancient things written on paper because they've never even had paper in their histories. Everything has been captured electronically, and they've doubled down on automation because they can, right? And I think you're going to see companies like this not only have a better starting point, but have a much faster ramp to productivity and impact in the space than you would see from a large pharma who is chained in this way.
Right. It's like if you go to developing countries, they have better trains. Because
they built the trains later. Yeah.
So they have a competitive edge in that way.
Oh, or to expand on that, right? The continent of Africa and much of the subcontinent of Southeast Asia, they use mobile phones for everything, right? Payments, medicine, contact networks, alerts. Why? They got mobile phones a little later, and they said, we're going to standardize our society on this technology platform in a way that the States or Europe did not initially. So we still have paper mailings, and many of these countries would not.
Yeah, I think it's easy to innovate if the first thing you get in your hands is modern, right? So then you can innovate on top of that. Like you said, payment. Even in India, you go to some street vendor, you use their payment service, PayPal, right? So you just scan the barcode. But if you go to like stores in America, or if you go to Germany, they still accept cash. Right?
Yeah. We visited Japan, my family, 5 or 6 years ago, and it's a more cash-based society than even America or Europe, right? So much so that you will often go to places and you'll say, can I bring a credit card? And they'll say, no, we're cash first. And I think to myself, wow, how can one country be cash first and then all other countries be mobile first? It's a very odd dichotomy.
Right. And what are your thoughts about big pharma versus smaller companies? I was reading one stat that return on research investment by big pharma is like 1.9%, and return on research investment by smaller biotech is like over 9%. I don't remember the exact percentage, but it was huge difference. So what do you think? What do you think in the future? Do you think we will still have, let's talk about after 10 years, 20 years, we will still have 10,000, 20,000 people, mega biotech or mega pharma companies? Or you think industry will split and smaller entities will lead this biotech revolution that is on the horizon?
I think you will still have some mega conglomerate pharma. Why? Because there's a parallel thread underneath for strategic acquisition, right? So yes, you will see biotechs that will grow and innovate and will blast ahead and have this large ROI because they have small, agile teams. They're a lot closer to the software and tech development model than pharma would. They can do things with smaller teams. They can pivot very fast in a way that pharma cannot, and they don't have the lift of a larger pharma in terms of their old data or their standardization or government regulation, et cetera. Yes, but the contrasting force is that big pharma still has a preponderance of the market, right? They still have recurring revenue from existing medicines and ones they can make bigger bets on now. And they still have a war chest, is the way many will use to describe it, that can be used to acquire these smaller players. So I think, will always be this warp and wend. I think it will shift towards the smaller biotechs in that you will see many more of the 500 to 1,000 person companies as tech accelerates them. But I think you will still see the pharma conglomerate model as long as that cash ability to acquire companies exists.
Right. And I think smaller companies currently focus on early stages, and then they just get acquired or they out license it. But I do think it's still not an efficient model. Even when pharma in licenses it, the efficiency, if you compare it, they have all the bureaucracy around things, and then they have to prioritize because they have more to lose in some cases, right? They cannot experiment on some innovative molecule with like very low probability of success. But smaller players have a more bandwidth to take bigger risk. So I think eventually, I don't know if it will happen in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, pharma companies will take the back seat and smaller companies will really lead this revolution. I think that's how it should be. But biotech has to become more, they should work more in networks and smaller companies leading it. Bigger companies have strengths, and when it comes to regulatory understanding, when it comes to money, right? They can always take the position of venture capitalists. What Bayer is doing.
Putting more bodies on the problem, right? You can at all times upscale as a pharma. You can say we need to put 500 scientists on there. Boom, there you go.
You're right. So I really like what Bayer is doing. In Germany, they call it Bayer. They have one, I don't know if it's a company or it's like a part of Bayer. They call it Leaps by Bayer. So they invest in all these innovative companies. They established a partnership with Israel government recently and funded these smaller players. So I think that is the future. But you're right. I mean, bigger companies will have their own presence, but they will move towards their strengths more than innovation.
So I'll offer one other model that I've seen some evidence of as well that happens in these large companies. So in many of them, the research engine has been so effective and so efficient that they cannot possibly prosecute all their products, right? They literally have some that will wait and take a back seat for a few years while something else is moving down the development and then clinical pipeline. So what is encouraging to see is oftentimes they will divest of that asset. They'll say, all right, here's, $10 million and this asset, and one of my executives and his team of scientists will split off from our company. They'll fund their own biotech. It stays connected to our company, but they race ahead with their own thing and their own trajectory in order to capitalize on this otherwise lost opportunity. That's another way in which, to your point, these mega conglomerates will start to, lessen because they will spin off smaller entities. And those entities could be cloud first if they wanted to be.
Yeah, no, that will be super powerful. Imagine 50,000 people company create their own 1,000 companies, right? They have their autonomy, but they still have access to this parent.
The larger resource. Yes.
So I think that would be really powerful. Here's the solution.
So many neat models, right? So many neat models. There's the incubator model that's favored by an Atlas or a Lab Central, right? I mean, there's so many interesting models that, being honest, I'm not that old, but even at the beginning of my career, you wouldn't have had access to that. It was really a pretty clear choice. You went into large pharma or you went into biotech, and that was it. And nowadays, right, you can do anything: tech enablement, automation enablement, data enablement, strategic alliances, divestment. The world's your oyster if you're in this field.
Right. No, I would love to see tens of thousands of biotech running their companies from Starbucks.
Yeah.
So if they have data in the cloud, arguably you don't have to do experiments for everything. So if you can just source that data, high quality data. So I think that's the future. Sooner or later it will happen. Yeah.
I'd love to add to that a tiny bit. There's low footprint instruments as well now, right? That didn't exist even 5 years ago. We're talking about HPLCs that fit into 1 by 1 foot,
right.
Tinier arrays, tinier robot arms. You could really get back to the garage, which is what, a lot of tech companies and food companies came out of, is somebody, loving something and doing it in their shop at night. You could build a lab in your garage now with small footprint instruments. And like you said, you could run it from Starbucks, but have it all operate in a little 100 square foot shop. And you could do real science there. And that's amazing.
You're totally right. I learned about one company, it's called Mini PCR. They have like pocket sized PCR.
Oh, that's so cool.
Right. So I would love to see people running their biotech companies from their garage, like we see like a success story in the tech world, right? Exactly. Steve Jobs and his co-founder worked from garage first year or so. Yeah, but I think we need regulatory guidelines.
True.
Like how we can really support garage biotech. I don't think we have infrastructure in place. There will be worries among neighbors. They are doing some mad science, Frankenstein thing.
I mean, how about this? If it could be applied to the governmental regulation of cannabis, if it could be applied to the regulation of tobacco, of beer and alcoholic beverages, theoretically, you could apply it to pharmaceuticals in a similar way.
Totally.
I'm sure the government infrastructure exists.
Right. I want to know, what are your thoughts about the role of AI? I know it's overused term. It bothers me when I see AI powered this, AI powered that. But in reality, very few technology, very few platforms really have data to have some intelligence. So what do you think is the role of AI? The overused term, but there is still some AI. So what is the role of AI in lab of the future or in biotech of the future?
Sure, I'd say there's a near-term role and a long-term role. The near-term role is, as we've been talking about extensively here, to remove work from humans. The number of times people in a day have to scroll through a spreadsheet for an inventory or for a gene name or for a therapy. Why not let an AI learn what your spreadsheets look like, what kind of information's in there, and organize it for you, or delete dupes or clean up data, or just, I hate to use this word too, but harmonize your spreadsheets so that, when data came to you, it all looked about the same and contained useful things or had useful search. In the short term, that would be amazing, right? I would love if my looking through spreadsheets, quota for the week was reduced by 3 hours. And that would be generally useful to everyone. Same thing with, for example, interpreting image data. It's so applicable there that there's Kaggle competitions, right? There's multiple open source efforts around images. Well, that's going to prove out very fast because most of those images are not proprietary, right? They are widely available, very much technology. You and I have 5, 6, 10 megapixel cameras in our hands. You can take those images or you can take those microscopy images and quickly learn from them. I think that's going to be the first blast, is reduction of work and interpretation of easily accessible open source things. The longer term, the 5 or 10 years out, hopefully sooner, but we'll see, is to actually have AI doing intelligent design, complementing the human. So this is where we would have that an AI can integrate the learnings from your chemistry, all the protein binding data, all the in vivo and in vitro biology data, and all the cellular culture data and safety data, and can say, okay, Guru, you want to follow up on leads 1, 2, and 3, and let go of leads 7, 8, 9, and 200. I don't think we're there. I think we have early efforts. I don't think we're fully there, but I would love to see, a firm that could operate on that basis.
Right, but for all of that, we need harmonized data.
We need harmonized data. That's one of the major, but again, exponential. Human brains are usually terrible at understanding exponentials. Now that we have this early harmonized data, now that we have microscale automation through players like Recursion and Beam and all the vendors that support these companies, you're going to see this build very quickly, right? And you're going to see better AI models next year than you saw in the previous 10. It's just, that's the way the data will build.
Yeah, it's very exciting time to be in this biotech pharma world, and also to merge life science with computing, with automation. I think it's really powerful. We will see the magic in this space more in the near future.
I can't wait, right? How can we live in a world where you can push a button and get something delivered to your house tomorrow, but you can't push a button and say, what's the best drug for this?
It's going to happen. It's just a matter of time. Mike, it was a pleasure talking to you. It was really fun. Let's
Guru, thank you very much. Love this conversation. Hope to continue it another day.
Let's do it. Thanks,
Take
Mike.
care.
Bye.